and welcome back, everybody, to the More Than Skill podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here today. My name is Kara, and on today's episode, we are talking about body language. So, how is your body language affecting your athletes? What does their body language look like? Are you sabotaging your practice by your own body language? And we're going to give you some strategies to kind of mitigate that if that's what's happening. Okay. Before we get into that, I do have your mental strategy tidbit of the day, which is this. Want to make sure that we're checking in with our athletes when it comes to this mental strategy stuff. So hopefully we're spending about 5 to 10 minutes every practice just filling their toolboxes with some mental strategy activities and games and things, most of which that I teach you here on the podcast. But we want to make sure that we're trying to reinforce those ideas in practice. So I actually use a handy dandy little checklist where I know that in the beginning of practice, we're kind of establishing what the goals of the practice are. We're doing a mental strategy activity, but then in the middle of the practice, we're checking back in. We're saying, how are you using today's lesson? We're saying, hey, take a minute, hype up a teammate. Hey, take a minute and think about, are you living somewhere that's in a abundant mindset? Or are you living somewhere below the line in a lack mindset? Like, just keep checking in with them. Something else I like to do is have them kind of assess where their self-talk was at the end of practice. So, hey guys, how was your practice today? I want you to go ahead and rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 of what your self-talk was. And let's talk through that. Let's think about how we can get better at it. If it was not as great, that's okay. If it was great, good job. So those kinds of things. We want to just make sure that we're reinforcing those ideas that we talk about. It's just like any other thing that we practice, any other drill or technique. It takes practice. So we want to make sure that we are constantly reinforcing it. So that is your little tidbit for today. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the episode. So today we're talking about body language. Body language, the way that we stand, the way that we move, the way that we're reacting physically, it often speaks louder than words, and we know that, okay? You guys know exactly what I'm talking about, especially if you're working with youth athletes in the middle school to teen range. You know about the eye rolls and the eyebrow raises and slouched shoulders and the little head tilt to the side, things like that. It's especially important in sports. So if you think about like a basketball player getting back on defense, like sometimes they'll get down really low, they'll like bang on the floor. So their body language is saying like, yeah, come at me. Then you think about like a different defensive player who got beat and it kind of like throw his hands up in the air, like roll his eyes. Those are two different body language things that are saying two completely different things. So that's why it's so important, and that's why we want to get into it today. Study from the University of California found that children are influenced by body language more than adults in forming opinions and understanding emotions. So if you think about that, they are looking towards our facial expressions, our nonverbal cues from their peers, teachers, classmates, and body language from those people, and just learning more than they would through talking or through speech. So I want to continue to put the emphasis on why body language is so important. In a team setting, kids will pick up on what their coach's energy is. So if a coach comes in and they're frustrated, tired, mad, upset, scowling, have really low energy, your athletes are going to mirror that. This happened to me, I think it was a few years ago now, and I've probably talked about it on the podcast before. I did have a practice where I don't know what was going on with me, but I was like mega frustrated. I'm like kind of coming down on the kids, like, what the heck is going on today? Felt very low energy, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. It ended up just being one of those days it's like not a great practice. And I kept analyzing it and just figuring out like what was it that was making that so rough. And I eventually came to the conclusion, oh, it was me. Whoops. I kind of walked in that day like not feeling great, not really maybe wanting to be there, already in a frustrated mood, possibly bringing in outside emotions into the gym. And then what happened was my athletes just ended up mirroring it. So I came into practice just like, let's get started, let's warm up, like not really projecting my voice, probably had my arms crossed or hands in my pockets, probably had kind of like my eyebrows raised looking at them, like, what are you guys doing? And then from there, it just de escalates, right? So none of these emotions are processing like consciously, but definitely the athletes were seeing me subconsciously like, oh, she's mad, or oh, she's frustrated, or she doesn't want to be here. So they will mirror that. She's kind of like, oh, we know today is going to be a bad practice. It's going to be tough. She's going to be hard on us, like those kinds of things. So after I realized, like, okay, this was my problem. This was me, and my kids were simply just projecting what they saw me doing. I realized that I had to make a switch there. And from that point on, I really tried to come into practice with a lot of energy, just like a smile on my face, big body movements. It's kind of like on my feet, not sitting down, not taking pauses, making sure I'm walking around, giving corrections, like just always active and always engaging with the athletes. That is how my body language changed after I realized kind of that mistake that I had made. We want to make sure that we are reviewing with the athletes what good and bad body language looks like. So, this is another skill that they have to learn, and it has to be taught by you. It's going to obviously become best to be taught by example. But just to go over with them, poor body language looks like lack of eye contact, arms crossed, turning away from the group, being rushed or anxious, having a monotone. Those types of things look like poor body language. So you can discuss that with your athletes. Positive looking body language or better body language is going to look like smiling, open postures, eye contact that is constant or consistent at least, enthusiastic. So just go over that with your athletes. At the end of the episode, we're going to go over just a couple techniques that you can do to help them practice it, but we want to just make sure that they know the difference between good and bad. And you're going to have to call them out. Like I have one athlete in particular, she's excellent, high level athlete, but I always catch myself thinking like, oh, something's wrong with her. Because it looks like she doesn't want to be there. Like she'll be all slouched over or like have her head tilted to the side and kind of just like have this expression on her face that looks like, what am I doing here? Or I'm better than this. And then all of a sudden we'll go on the floor and we'll start like performing a section of the routine and she lights up. She's like doing everything she's supposed to be doing. Her technique is perfect. And so then I think about it and I'm like, oh, I guess I was just totally reading that wrong. But that's something that I also need to teach her. Like, your body language is saying this to me. I want you to be aware of that because I know that's not really what's going on in your head, but you have to be aware of like what you're saying with your body. So think if you have like any athletes like that, you don't want to call them out, but maybe just call them aside and be like, dude, are you feeling okay? Because this is what your body language is saying to me right now. And then hopefully they'll be like, oh no, I feel great. Like, I'm so glad to be here. Or it could be an indication that they do need to have a small conversation with you. And same thing from the coaches or your coaching staff or yourself. You want to make sure that you are aware of your body language and the message that that is sending. Studies have shown that an athlete's performance improves when they when they receive nonverbal cues. So, nonverbal cues of encouragement from their coaches. So, if I see an athlete doing something and I give them a little head nod or a little thumbs up or like a smile, there are studies that actually have proved that that will improve their performance. So, keep that in mind. By athletes and coaches knowing and being aware of improving their body language, we can create synergy. So, what that means is if everybody's on the same page and we're all at the same energy level, we can kind of create this environment where the vibration is really high and things are getting done at a fast rate and things are remaining positive and we're working through problems. Just synergy just means we're all on the same page. And that's the vibe that you want in a practice. Is it going to happen all the time? No, but you can start it off as the coach by coming in kind of like pumped up. So that's why that is important. Now, how do we get better at that? So I have a challenge for you. It's a little bit different and out of the box. I don't want it to be like a detriment to your practice necessarily, but it is something you can experiment with. So you could take 5 minutes out of your practice and like practice extremely poor body language. You yourself as the coach, like you could be slunched over, slunched, slouched over, arms crossed, like looking down. You could even be sitting down. You could just be like rolling your eyes or sighing really loud. And you could like take notes on how that affects your athletes. Like, are they then mirroring your body language? And then, of course, you could flip the switch and go back to being like high vibe, high energy, and see how they respond to that. And you guys could have a discussion about it and see, like, see how my body language affected you in such a negative way. It doesn't even have to be spoken. Like, you don't even have to say anything. You could just see if that of those kind of nonverbal cues have an effect on them, and talk about how that affected them, and how it could have been improved, and what they felt when they saw you kind of acting like that. Now, that's not something that I've done. It's something that I've done on accident, which is what I just explained, but it's not something I've done on purpose. I could, but yeah, maybe I'll think about doing that and report back to you guys. But another thing you can do is just make sure you're checking yourself. See how you're feeling before you walk into your practice. Understand that you need to kind of leave outside emotions or outside problems outside of your practice and try not to bring them in. Take an inventory. Think about your last week of practices, your last month of practices. How have you been acting in those? How has your body language been? What is your body language saying right now as you're listening to this podcast? Those kinds of things. You want to try to take an inventory of your own body language. Another challenge that I have for you, and you could also use this with your athletes, is to become completely nonverbal, or for like a section of practice. Like, if you had to walk into practice tomorrow and not speak, what would your body language look like? Like, what would you be doing with your arms and your face and your eyes to try to get the kids to understand, this is where I want you to go and this is what I want you to do? And it's great to do with the athletes as well. I know you've probably heard of so many exercises where it's like, okay, you have to, whatever, get yourself in line, shortest to tallest, but you can't talk. Or you have to line up by birthdays, but you can't talk. Like, those kinds of things. Those are really effective for body language. And it can help you also identify ways that they need improvement. So if we're having the athletes do an exercise that's like, okay, line up shortest to tallest, but you can't talk, but you see athletes like rolling their eyes at each other, or like sighing, or tilting their head, or crossing their arms, things like that, you know that maybe they need a little bit of help, communicating non-verbally, and that's an important skill to have. So that's just another little challenge for you there. Be self-aware. Make sure that you are starting this with your younger athletes. I have a team of minis, which is athletes that are like 5 to 8 years old. Now that I'm recording this podcast, I want to make sure that I'm also teaching them body language. And it's as simple as like, they know how to express emotion. So if we have a little activity where I'm like, show me what you look like when you look sad. Show me what you look like when you're not listening. Show me what you look like when you don't want to be here. You just woke up from a nap. Like, those things, we can practice those. Show me what you look like when you're excited. Like, they can learn from that, and they can learn how to use that. And then you'll be able to hold them accountable for those things in the middle of practice. So this was a super short episode. I just wanted to get it in your brain. Mainly, I want you to be able to hold yourselves accountable for the nonverbal cues that you are giving to your athletes. I want to make sure that you're checking yourself before you even get into practice. What is your energy like? What is your body saying? And again, try to use those activities. See if you can coach nonverbally for 5 minutes. And what does that look like? Make sure that you're taking an inventory of what your body language looks like for your athletes. And then take a few minutes to just reflect and see if there needs to be any kind of shift, and accept that within yourself. Accept that maybe this hasn't been the best and I need to get better at it. As coaches, we always want to make sure that we're challenging ourselves to get better, because we do it with our athletes every single day, right? Like, we're challenging them. Hey, I need you to accept this. I need you to be okay with this new skill that I'm trying to get you to do. I need you to be tough. I need you to perform that better. So if we're asking all of them to do these things, we can certainly hold ourselves accountable for something as easy as body language. All right, I hope that helped you. Have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you next time.